I remember the exact moment my world shattered, not with the dramatic crash of breaking glass, but with the quiet click of a door lock that no longer recognized my key. After 3 weeks in Singapore finalizing the Chung acquisition, the deal that would cement Whitmore International's foothold in Asian markets, I had returned home early to surprise Sophia. The 15-hour flight had left me exhausted, but eager to see my wife's face light up when I walked through our door unannounced. Instead, I stood on my own doorstep, key uselessly turning in a changed lock, staring at the unfamiliar name now displayed on the intercom. Harrington family. My confusion turned to something darker when the door finally opened to reveal not my wife's elegant features, but the weathered face of a middle-aged man I'd never seen before. "Can I help you?" he asked, suspicious of the disheveled businessman on his porch. "There's been a mistake," I said, the words feeling hollow even as they left my mouth. "This is my home, the Whitmore estate." His expression shifted from wariness to pity. "I'm sorry, but we purchased this property 3 days ago. The seller was quite clear that the transaction was final." The seller. Singular, not sellers. My phone was in my hand before I consciously reached for it. Sophia's number rang 4 times before connecting. "Daniel?" Her voice carried that musical lilt that had first drawn me to her across a crowded charity gala 7 years ago. "You're back early. Where's our house, Sophia?" The calmness in my voice surprised even me. A pause. Too long. Then, "We should talk in person. Meet me at the Continental." The line went dead before I could respond. "My name is Daniel Whitmore, 42 years old. Third-generation CEO of Whitmore International, a company my grandfather built from a single freight ship into a global logistics empire. I was raised to believe that a man's word was his bond, and that family, both blood and chosen, was sacred above all. I met Sophia Renault when I was 35, already established in my career but admittedly lonely in my personal life. She was 29, breathtakingly beautiful, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through the professional facade I presented to the world. The daughter of a French diplomat and an American socialite, she moved through high society with effortless grace, yet somehow made me feel like I was the only person in any room we shared. Our courtship was swift, but not reckless. Within 6 months, I knew I wanted to spend my life with her. The wedding was an affair to remember. 450 guests gathered at the Whitmore estate, the sprawling property that had belonged to my family for 4 generations. My father had passed just a year before, and I felt his absence keenly that day, but I also felt certain he would have approved of Sophia. She charmed everyone, from my oldest family friends to my most skeptical business associates. "You found a rare one," my CFO, Martin, told me at the reception, champagne glass raised in a toast. "She looks at you like you hung the moon." I believed it. For 5 years, I believed it with every fiber of my being. We built what I thought was a perfect life together. I continued expanding the company internationally, which meant frequent travel, but Sophia never complained. Instead, she threw herself into managing the estate, redecorating rooms that hadn't been touched since my grandmother's time, hosting dinner parties that became coveted invitations among Boston's elite, and establishing herself as a formidable presence on several prestigious charity boards. "I love this life we've created," she would tell me, curled against my side in the massive 4-poster bed that had been my parents'. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it's real." I trusted her completely. That was my first mistake. Looking back now, the signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs through the final year of our marriage, small moments of discord that I dismissed or rationalized away. There was the night I returned from a conference in Berlin to find Sophia hosting an impromptu dinner party. Among the guests was Victor Harlow, a real estate developer known for transforming historic properties into luxury condominiums. I thought nothing of it at the time. Sophia was always networking, always making connections. Victor has some fascinating ideas about urban development, she told me later that night. You should hear his vision for the waterfront district. I nodded, too jet-lagged to engage, missing how her eyes lingered on her phone when it chimed with a text message moments later. Then there were the comments from her family, subtle at first, then increasingly bold. "It seems almost wasteful," her mother remarked during a Sunday lunch, gesturing to the expansive grounds visible through the dining room windows. "Just two people living in all this space." "It's not just space, Eleanor," I replied evenly. "It's history, my family's history." Sophia's father, Robert, a man whose aristocratic bearing masked shrewd financial instincts, nodded thoughtfully. "History has its place, but one must also think of the future. Properties like this, they're appreciating assets, not merely sentimental objects." "The Whitmore estate isn't an asset," I said firmly. "It's our home." Sophia smoothly changed the subject, but I caught the quick glance between her and her parents. Most telling was the garden incident. The East Garden had been my father's sanctuary, a meticulously designed space with rare specimens he'd collected from around the world. Following his wishes, we had scattered his ashes there, beneath the Japanese maple he'd planted as a young man. I kept the garden exactly as he had left it, a living memorial that brought me peace. 3 months before my Singapore trip, I returned home to find landscapers tearing out the maple. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding," Sophia explained, feigning distress. "I told them to trim it, not remove it. I'm devastated, Daniel." I believed her. I comforted her. Another mistake. The final warning came from Martin during a private moment in my office. "Daniel, I don't want to overstep," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "But Sophia's been making inquiries about the company's structure, specifically about your personal holdings versus corporate assets." "She's just taking an interest in the business," I defended, though something cold settled in my stomach. Martin looked unconvinced. "Just be careful. The questions she's asking, they're the kind someone asks when they're calculating net worth, not when they're showing casual interest." I dismissed his concerns. After all, Sophia had signed a prenuptial agreement. What could she possibly gain? As it turned out, she wasn't after my company. She was after something far more personal. The Continental Hotel stood as a testament to old Boston money, all mahogany panels and discreet service. Sophia had selected our regular table in the corner of the bar, partially screened by a large potted fern. Privacy for what would undoubtedly be an unpleasant conversation. She looked flawless, as always. Emerald silk dress, pearls at her throat, hair styled in perfect waves, the image of class and composure. But I knew her well enough to spot the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her martini. "Daniel," she said, rising slightly as I approached. "You look exhausted. Sit, please." I remained standing. "Where's our home, Sophia?" She sank back into her chair, eyes darting to the other patrons before returning to me. "Perhaps we should order you a drink first." "I don't want a drink. I want to know why there's a family named Harrington living in our house." Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the glass. "It's sold," she said finally. "The estate has been sold." Despite having stood on the doorstep of my former home less than an hour ago, hearing the words from her lips sent a wave of nausea through me. "That's not possible," I said, finally taking the seat across from her. "That property is in my name." Something shifted in her expression, a flash of triumph quickly suppressed. "Actually, you signed the transfer documents last month, don't you remember? Right before you left for Singapore when you were signing all those contracts for the Cheng deal." The implication was clear. She had slipped property transfer documents into a stack of business papers, and I had signed without reading them closely. Except I hadn't. "I never signed anything regarding the estate," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Which means whatever documents you're referring to are forgeries." Her composure slipped, just for a moment. That's a serious accusation, Daniel. Where's the money, Sophia? What money? The estate was appraised last year at $28 million. Even a quick below-market sale would have brought in at least 20. Where is it? She took a long sip of her martini. I've transferred it to a secure account. For us. For our future. Our future, I repeated. The words tasted bitter. And what future might that be? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. Daniel, I know this seems dramatic, but I had to take decisive action. You're so tied to that house, to your family's past. It was holding us back. Us? Or you? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Don't be cruel. This is about building something new together. Something that's ours, not just yours. I leaned forward. And the garden? My father's ashes? Was that holding us back too? She had the decency to look away. Compromises had to be made. The Harringtons wanted immediate possession. The Harringtons, I said slowly. Not Victor Harlow? Her head snapped up, eyes wide. I had my answer. How long have you been sleeping with him? Daniel. How long, Sophia? She straightened, abandoning the pretense. 14 months. But it's not what you think. Victor understands me in ways you never could. He sees my potential. And your potential requires $20 million of my family's legacy? Our plan makes sense, she insisted, a desperate edge creeping into her voice. Victor's development company will transform the estate into luxury condominiums. The return on investment will be astronomical. I was going to tell you once everything was finalized. How generous, I remarked, ice in my veins. And I assume your parents were involved as well? Let me guess. They get a cut for their participation? Her silence was confirmation enough. I stood, buttoning my suit jacket with steady hands. I need to make some calls. Daniel, wait. She reached for my arm. You need to understand the documents are legally binding. The sale is complete. Fighting this will only embarrass you professionally. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then into her eyes. You know, Sophia, in all our years together, I don't think you ever really knew me at all. I walked away without looking back, already planning my next move. The Whitmore Legacy Foundation had been my father's idea, established 2 years before his death. A private trust designed to preserve family holdings while minimizing tax implications. 3 months before my trip to Singapore, after the incident with the Japanese maple, I had quietly transferred full legal ownership of the estate to the foundation. The paperwork was handled not by my usual attorney but by a specialist in New York, far from Sophia's prying eyes. I hadn't told her. Some instinct, call it self-preservation or simply inherited caution, had kept me silent on the matter. The deed Sophia had forged my signature on was worthless. I no longer held personal ownership of the property to transfer. From my car, I called my security chief, a former FBI agent named Harrison. Sir, he answered on the first ring. I was about to call you. There's been unusual activity at the estate. I know, I said. I need you to secure all surveillance footage from the property for the past month, and I need a team at the estate immediately. The sale was fraudulent. Already in motion, Harrison replied, unfazed. I flagged the attempted property transfer 2 days ago and implemented the Kingfisher Protocol. Kingfisher was our code for potential corporate espionage. I should have known Harrison would be 3 steps ahead. What about the Harringtons? I asked. There are no Harringtons, Harrison said grimly. The property was purchased through a shell company linked to Victor Harlow Development. They moved in contractors this morning. They're gutting the place. My blood ran cold. The garden? A pause. I'm sorry, sir. It was the first thing they demolished. I ended the call and pulled to the side of the road, unexpected emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Not just for the desecration of my father's memorial, but for the magnitude of Sophia's betrayal. This wasn't an impulsive mistake or a crime of passion. This was calculated destruction of something she knew I held sacred. I took exactly 60 seconds to feel the grief and rage. Then I packed those emotions away, started the car, and drove to my company's headquarters. By midnight, I had assembled my team. Harrison for security, Martin for financial tracking, my most ruthless corporate attorney, and a private investigator who specialized in white-collar crime. By dawn, we had uncovered the full extent of the conspiracy. Victor Harlow had orchestrated the scheme, but Sophia had been an eager participant. Her parents had introduced them at a gallery opening 14 months earlier, and Victor had been cultivating her ever since. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity: sell the estate, divide the proceeds, and disappear to separate destinations before I returned from Singapore. Victor would later develop the property, profiting a second time from the land my family had tended for generations. What they hadn't counted on was my early return, or the fact that their legally binding documents were entirely fraudulent. "They've made 3 critical mistakes," my attorney explained as we reviewed the evidence. "First, forgery of your signature. Second, filing false documents with the county. Third, attempting to sell property they had no legal right to sell. This isn't just civil fraud, it's criminal." "What are our options?" I asked. "We can move immediately with civil action to freeze assets and reclaim the property," he advised. "Criminal charges will take longer, but the evidence is strong." I nodded slowly, a plan taking shape in my mind. "How quickly can we get law enforcement involved?" "With the evidence we have?" "By this afternoon." "Good," I said, "but I want to handle this my way. Sophia and her co-conspirators didn't just try to steal my property, they tried to erase my family's legacy. I want them to understand exactly what they've done." The next morning, as contractors continued to tear apart my ancestral home, I set my plan in motion. First came the legal notices, delivered simultaneously to Victor Harlow, Sophia, and her parents. Not just notifications of civil action for fraud, but specific claims tailored to each participant. Breach of fiduciary duty for Victor, who had a legal obligation as a licensed real estate developer. Criminal conversion for Sophia's parents, who had knowingly participated in the scheme. And for Sophia herself, the most damning charge of all: criminal breach of trust. Within hours, their phones began ringing incessantly as banks froze accounts linked to the fraudulent transaction. $20 million vanished from their grasp as if it had never existed. By noon, news vans had gathered outside Harlow Development's downtown office. An anonymous tip, courtesy of Harrison, had alerted local media to a potential real estate scandal involving one of Boston's most historic properties. Victor emerged from the building to a barrage of questions, his usual confident demeanor replaced by barely contained panic. I watched the footage from my temporary office, noting with satisfaction how quickly he threw Sophia under the bus. "This was entirely Ms. Whitmore's initiative," he told reporters, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool spring air. "She assured me the sale was legitimate and her husband was fully aware. If there's been any impropriety, my company had no knowledge of it." Sophia, meanwhile, was frantically trying to contact me. 27 missed calls and counting. I let each one go to voicemail, listening later as her messages evolved from demanding to pleading. "Daniel, this is ridiculous. Call me back immediately. Daniel, please. There's been a misunderstanding. Daniel, I'm begging you. Whatever you think happened, we can work through this." Her parents were similarly desperate, though their concern was transparently self-interested. "Think of the scandal," her father urged in his message. "This will destroy your reputation as much as ours." He was wrong. Boston's old money circles had never fully embraced the Renaults, viewing them as calculating social climbers. The narrative of the faithful husband betrayed by his grasping wife and her lover would only cement my standing as the wronged party. At 3 o'clock, I made my first public move. Not a press conference, which would have seemed desperate, but a calm statement released through my company's PR department. Whitmore International confirms that an attempt was made to fraudulently sell the historic Whitmore estate. The property remains under the legal ownership of the Whitmore Legacy Foundation and was never legitimately transferred. We are cooperating with authorities regarding the criminal investigation into this matter. By 4 o'clock, police had arrived at Victor's office with a warrant. The charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, filing falsified documents, and criminal conversion. His arrest, conducted in full view of the still lingering media, was the lead story on every local news broadcast that evening. Sophia called 17 more times. I continued to ignore her. At 6, I finally returned to the estate, accompanied by Harrison and a court officer with an emergency injunction halting all work on the property. The contractors, already nervous about the news reports, quickly packed up and departed. The Harrington representative, actually Victor's assistant, was escorted from the premises. The damage was extensive but largely cosmetic. The valuable antiques had been moved to storage facilities, which Harrison's team had already located. The art collection had been prepared for auction, but not yet transported. The physical structure remained sound, though interior walls had been demolished in several wings. Only the garden was truly gone, bulldozed to make way for what would have been a parking structure in Victor's development plan. Standing among the churned earth and uprooted plants, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had been taken from me. Not just property, but memory, connection, legacy. That night I slept in a hotel downtown, waiting for the final phase of my plan to unfold. The court date was set for exactly 2 weeks later. During that time, I maintained complete radio silence with Sophia and her family, communicating only through attorneys. Their increasingly desperate settlement offers were met with firm rejection. Victor, released on bail but facing career-ending charges, attempted to distance himself from the scheme. His lawyer approached mine with an offer to testify against Sophia in exchange for leniency. I instructed my attorney to appear interested but make no commitments. Sophia, growing increasingly desperate, made one final attempt to reach me directly. She appeared at my company's headquarters, causing a scene in the lobby until security escorted her out. The humiliating incident was captured by an employee's phone and quickly circulated among Boston's social set. By the time we entered the courtroom, the narrative was firmly established. The successful, honorable businessman betrayed by his greedy, unfaithful wife and her scheming lover. Public opinion had already rendered its verdict. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. My team presented irrefutable evidence of the forgery, complete with expert testimony regarding the falsified signatures. Bank records showed the movement of funds through various accounts, ultimately revealing that Sophia's parents were to receive 30% of the proceeds, Victor 40%, and Sophia the remaining 30%. Most damning was the series of text messages recovered from Victor's phone, in which he and Sophia explicitly discussed deceiving me and timing the sale to coincide with my absence. "Dee leaves for Singapore on Tuesday," she had written. "We'll have 3 weeks to complete everything before he returns." Victor's response: "Perfect. By the time he figures it out, you'll be enjoying your new life in Milan, and I'll be breaking ground on the development." Sophia's attorney, recognizing the hopelessness of their position, attempted to frame the actions as a misguided attempt to liberate assets rather than outright theft. The judge was unpersuaded. The civil judgment came first. Full restoration of all property to the Whitmore Legacy Foundation, plus punitive damages amounting to an additional $10 million. The criminal charges would follow a separate track, but the district attorney made it clear that jail time was a distinct possibility for all involved. As we left the courthouse, rain began to fall, a sudden, driving downpour that seemed fitting for the occasion. Reporters clustered under the portico, cameras trained on the main entrance. I exited through a side door, preferring to avoid the media circus. That's when I saw her. Sophia, standing alone on the steps, her designer clothing soaked, makeup running down her face. Our eyes met across the rain-slicked plaza. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. She, broken and defeated. I, composed and unbowed. 1,000 possible words hung in the air between us. In the end, I said nothing. I simply continued walking, shoulders straight, eyes forward. Behind me, I heard a choked sob, quickly swallowed. I didn't look back. 6 months later, the Whitmore estate was nearly restored. Skilled craftsmen had repaired the architectural damage, valuable pieces had been reclaimed from storage, and art dealers had tracked down the few items that had already been sold to unsuspecting buyers. Only the garden remained forever altered. In its place, I commissioned a new design. Not an attempt to recreate what was lost, but a thoughtful space that honored the memory while acknowledging the change. At its center stood a stone memorial inscribed with my father's favorite quote, "What we build in wisdom, malice cannot truly destroy." Victor Harlow pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for his testimony against Sophia and her parents. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, lost his real estate license permanently, and was ordered to pay substantial restitution. His company, unable to weather the scandal, declared bankruptcy within weeks. Sophia's parents fled to France ahead of their arrest, abandoning their daughter to face consequences alone. Interpol flagged their passports, limiting their movement to the European Union and effectively exiling them from American soil. Their social connections evaporated overnight, leaving them isolated even in their native Paris. As for Sophia, the court showed little mercy. She received a suspended sentence of 2 years, 5 years probation, and community service, a relatively light criminal punishment, but the financial penalties were crushing. Every asset in her name was seized to satisfy the judgment against her. The prenuptial agreement she had signed protected my business holdings, but left her personal property vulnerable. Designer clothes, jewelry, the luxury car she had insisted on for her birthday, all liquidated to pay her debt. Beyond the material losses, Sophia's social destruction was absolute. Friends who had once eagerly accepted her invitations now crossed streets to avoid speaking to her. Charity boards quietly asked for her resignation. The elegant social butterfly who had once flitted confidently through Boston's most exclusive gatherings found herself unwelcome everywhere. I filed for divorce immediately after the trial, citing irreconcilable differences rather than infidelity or criminal behavior. I had no interest in a public airing of grievances. The criminal trial had accomplished that thoroughly enough. The divorce was finalized in record time, with Sophia contesting nothing. On a crisp fall morning, as I supervised the planting of new trees in the reconstructed garden, Martin joined me, hands tucked into the pockets of his overcoat. "Have you heard?" he asked, watching as workers carefully positioned a young Japanese maple. "Sophia's taken a job as a sales associate at Neiman Marcus. Apparently she's living in a studio apartment in Somerville now." I nodded but offered no comment. "Victor's appeal was denied," Martin continued, "and word is the French authorities are investigating the Renaults for tax evasion related to undeclared income from the property scheme." "Good," I said simply, my breath visible in the cool air. Martin studied me for a moment. "Are you happy, Daniel?" The question gave me pause. Happiness seemed too simple a word for what I felt. Satisfaction, certainly. Vindication, yes. But beneath those emotions ran something quieter, more fundamental. "I'm at peace," I answered finally. "They tried to take everything from me. Not just material possessions, but my history, my family's legacy. They failed. And that's enough?" I looked around at the estate, damaged but healing, changed but enduring. My father had always told me that a true legacy isn't built in stone or wood, but in principles that withstand betrayal and loss. "Yes," I said. "That's enough." Later that evening, I stood alone in my study, watching night settle over the grounds. My phone chimed with a text message. Sophia, breaking months of silence. "I'm sorry," it read simply. "For everything." I considered the words for a long moment, then deleted the message without responding. Some betrayals go beyond forgiveness, not out of bitterness, but because trust, once shattered so completely, cannot be restored. I closed the curtains against the gathering darkness and turned instead to the warm light of my home, reclaimed, rebuilt, and once again mine. In the quiet aftermath of chaos, I had found my own victory, not in revenge, but in restoration. Not in Sophia's downfall, but in my own resilience. The Whitmore legacy would continue, stronger now for having weathered the storm. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.